And I didn't see her on the list of adoptees last week.
Hey, how are you?
We are on the ambient mic here. Pictures of it.
Also, don't have any of those hot mic moments.
No hot mic mics.
Oh, yeah.
She's a reason.
Are we putting the audience all the way to the back, Eric?
Put in acoustic paneling in the dark.
Yeah, no, I think, well, the springs is too early, so we're.
Well, if you're gonna build a new,
Oh, in the
new
back, I
place,
see what you
might as well.
meant. No, Jared, I
I
get
think
you.
that we covered.
I mean, the ground was still a little frozen. Looks like.
Seems like right, it's just.
Yeah, we can tell Catherine's in charge. She just mentions that and bam. That was a good idea.
I mean, they called it my name the last
It wasn't just because she's the boss. I know, I just made a suggestion there. So, it's all good.
Now I see. Eric.
Huh?
It says from me, so I assume he's one of the.
Share that picture.
Oh.
Two.
Eric, as soon as you're ready, I'm ready.
Now. They said we're on the driveway. I need to have like something.
Come on in.
You ever wonder, you ever sit down and go, what am I doing? I still do that.
Yeah, it should be guest network. And it's either be our guest, all one word.
Hi, Andy.
Let me try that one first. Okay, then it's probably the Netgear 66.
So I'm.
And it should be all lowercase, narrow table, all one word, 258.
If you're lucky, Andy, she won't stop.
No, you're not.
Yeah, right. Could have been congratulations either way.
Yeah.
Narrow table,
Marty, we're gonna start.
all one word, and then 258.
Yeah, my wife actually gave me condolences tonight.
Yeah.
She found out first.
Good
Sorry to hear
evening,
her bad
And
news for you.
welcome to this public budget meeting and hearing of the Readfield Select Board and the Budget Committee. I'll call us to order at 6:32 PM. If you would all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much and for joining us. We always like to have an audience. There is remote participation and comment available tonight. Someone is monitoring Zoom, is that correct?
It would be Sean or Bill. Sean, is that you?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, now that we have that squared away, we'll move on.
Our meeting
Greg
agenda
didn't say
tonight
aye.
is are we flipping through these, Eric, or?
Yeah, so
On
I'll, I can screen share and then we'll just run through the presentation. I'll have to jump back and forth, but
Okay,
hopefully that works comfortably for people, so we can have that all available. All the meeting materials are available on the website. The select board and the public, we've got copies here of the meeting summary, as well as the budget summary. We do have a line item budget and the draft warrant available on the website as well, but those are not printed out in full form here. So let me get that shared.
so we're going to start by going through the meeting agenda. We'll have 10 minutes for welcome and introductory comments. Wow. Followed by 5 minutes of review of the meeting goals for the budget. And then we'll devote about an hour and a half to presenting and discussing the summary budget information. We'll have about 5 minutes at the end for anything else that has come up, and closing comments at about 10 minutes. Is there someone who would be willing to keep us on time? Be our timekeeper? Steve?
Oh, I'll be glad to do that.
Thank you. So I am Catherine Mills Woodson, Chair of the Readfield Select Board, and my fellow members with us tonight are
Sean Keegan,
Steve Angeles.
Dave Linton.
Are there any comments from the Select Board about the budget or our meeting or anything thus far? Well, that's going to move us along.
Okay,
There you go.
so welcome from the Budget Committee. We're glad to be here and be at this part of the process. We're interested in feedback. I'm Andy Tolman, I'm the chair. Marty Hash.
Ed Sims.
Ellen Schneider.
Chris Salmons. And we're also joined by our town manager,
Eric Dyer and
Teresa Shaw, our finance officer. And we don't ever want to forget our secretary, Angelica Pittman, over there taking care of all of us. So at this time, if there are any comments from members of the public who are present in the room, this would be a time to make any introductory comments. Is there anyone online who wishes to say anything? Okay. So the budget process to date has been 12 public meetings, including presentations to develop and discuss the budget held since October. We've had review and comments by members of the public from various boards and committees, from the Budget Committee, and from the Select Board. We've reviewed the budget details for all departments and divisions, and I think we'll just say the Budget Committee has reviewed all of those. We have taken what the Budget Committee has presented and scanned through it. And we've reviewed together and revised the 5-year capital plan and the revised accounting structure. When Sean, Eric, and I met yesterday, we discussed needing a follow-up meeting for that purpose. Now that the accounts have been further developed and descriptions added, which really weren't there previously. So we'd like to hold a joint Budget Committee Select Board workshop at our second May meeting, which is May 20th, from 6:30 to 7:30. So we will all be there. If any of you folks from the Budget Committee can join us, we would be very appreciative of that, so that we can further discuss the CIP and the accounting structure that has changed that. So we'll be better prepared for next time.
Okay, so the goals for tonight are to present an overview of the budget for this year as it currently exists. We'd like to answer questions as they come up. We're going to talk a little bit about key warrant articles, and which will include the proposed land use ordinance, which is not the size of the table for sure, and the proposed fairground, Church Road sidewalk, and the community park. And then we'll be presenting some information about the votes that are going forward. In preparing this year's budget, our joint goals were to be fiscally responsible and spend conservatively, to fund needed and necessary programs, and maintain town services. We also try to minimize the budget impacts to taxpayers insofar as the municipal side can do that. We wanted to maintain a stable and sustainable level of debt to borrow money when it made sense at rates that make sense, to use our fund balances wisely and properly. We've been working on continuing to have a long-range capital planning process, which helps us to do a number of the things above. And we also try as best we can to consider the town budget, which is under our purview, and keep that separate from the school and county budgets, which are not under our control, but which obviously affect our taxes. And then we all try to work together to improve towards the public good.
So in that respect, one of the things the select board discussed at our retreat, which was at the end of September this past year, was to complete projects that were already started. To try not to pile on more things in terms of work and in terms of money. And with that, we prioritize investment in recreational assets and public facilities, specifically having a community programming coordinator, a Readfield Fairgrounds Community Park, and the Church Road sidewalk. These are all things that have been talked about for several years. The community park had a vote. Both that and the sidewalk had multiple votes over the last several town meetings. We wanted to pursue creative financing grants and community donations for projects. That was a message sent loud and clear by the public through town meeting votes. To continue to improve communication and collaboration in the budget process. We've done everything we can think of to try and communicate with the public. We have our broadcast channel, we have the PEG station, we do YouTubes, we have public meetings, we have the email, we have the messenger online and in print. And there's always contacting people individually through email or phone. We wanted to better define the capital projects and further develop the capital investment plan. We've been doing a lot of work on that. Most of that heavy lifting has been done by Teresa and by Eric, along with the auditors. And to complete the transition in the accounting, which started about, well, almost a year ago. And really fell into place in January.
It's been ongoing for about 2 years now. We're getting to the end of it though. So this is the first full budget we will have that utilizes that format. And then next year, things will look a lot cleaner year over year because we'll be having consistent accounting between those two budget cycles. So
some of the things in the detailed budget look a little different because they'll be zeroed out for this budget, and things that had been in the budget as large expenses are zero, and some new things have a large amount that had nothing previously, and that's because of the change in the accounts. It's not that we've actually increased or decreased the spending. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Eric, who will run through most of the rest of the meeting.
okay, well, thank you, Catherine. And thanks everybody for being here to participate in this discussion. I do hope we get some questions. I think the things that we're going to say will generate questions because the budget committee and select board have been working through this for quite a while now, are familiar with some of the accounting changes that were alluded to, but that might not be the case for everybody. So what I wanted to start with is a little bit different than what I normally do. Normally, I would start with the detail information and talk about the individual departments and divisions, and then move up and talk about the broad strokes. But this year, because things are a bit perverse, a bit different, I wanted to start with some big, wide information and then narrow it down a little bit more as we go along. And there are a few times where I'll mention those accounting changes. And in essence, I just want to point out that those are changes that will help the town better track and manage our fiscal resources. And what it does is it takes things that don't belong in the capital, in the operating budget out. Capital items are one, also things that are special revenue items. And I can talk a little bit more about those when we get to some of those examples. But as Catherine said, there are some big holes and some big changes that don't necessarily make sense unless you think of them in that context, right? So, but I'll start with the overall tax base. Our assessor is again recommending a 10% factoring, which is where we add value in order to meet the state's expectations of what our property values ought to be. And I will say that the state's expectations are high, and we've been working very hard to meet those. With this increase, we will be about 55% higher than we were in 2020. So just a frenetic pace of increase, just to keep pace with what the state has assessed our values at. That increasing value is also impactful in another way when we talk about revenues. But I just wanted to point out that that 10% factoring is going to happen again. It'll be the fourth year that we've done that. 3 10s and a, well, no, so maybe it's 45, 3 10s and a 15. So sorry, it's only 45%. Still substantial. So what you would expect to see is that for the same amount of taxes, a 10% increase in valuation will result in a 10% decrease in the mill rate. So that's in a normal year with normal circumstances. And I'll say that just everybody wants to know the mill rate. I'll start with that. The municipal mill rate is 2.41 this year. And the total mill rate is estimated at 14.84. And we'll talk about those ratios a little bit more going forward. But in essence, the town is about 16–17% of the total tax bill that residents in this town will receive. The combined mill rate is 14.16 when you excuse me, the outside of the what did I do there? Total minus RSU. Okay. Well, anyway, so it is 14.84. I'm not sure what happened. Well, last year. That's why last year's mill rate was 14.16. So that's actually a lower mill rate last year than this year, and that's the opposite of what we would expect. But the reason is that we've seen overall some major increases in the cost of services. And I'm going to go through those. I'm going to start with the town and explain what's going on with us. Then I'm going to explain what's going on with the school and the county. So municipal budget highlights, we've seen labor and material costs go up. Inflation has affected us as it has the last several years. We have a 5% negotiated wage increase. And that is a big driver of our overall increase. We also have the addition of a community programming coordinator, which is additional staff time, but something that has been a top priority for the town and thus far hasn't been questioned as being something to take out of the budget. And I certainly think it's a good necessary thing when we look at efficiency and value. We lost $60,000 in state revenue sharing, and that was very impactful for us. A large reason for that was that the state law did not change. However, the state law includes a provision that slowly pushes municipalities off the fiscal cliff, whereby they do not receive the second disbursement of revenue sharing. So that was an unexpected change for us, and the $60,000 is pretty significant.
If your valuation is increasing. You get to the point where you.
Well, it's not just that, because there's also the state had a factor change from 11 to a 10. So they actually are tightening the belt at the same time. But our values did increase. So both of those things I think are true. So we have a roughly $75,000 net increase in what our municipal tax impact is this year. So basically, if not for that revenue shortfall, we would be looking at a 2 to 5% increase in our tax impact to residents for the municipal side of things. But because of that and other factors, and there are certainly other factors, we're looking at about a 7.5% municipal increase. And so that puts us back to the same out-of-pocket costs that we had in 2019. So in a little bit, I'm going to show you a picture that explains this, but what happened essentially is COVID. We were at a certain level of spending. We dropped that. We minimized impacts to taxpayers for 2 or 3 years. And then over time, we had to start gradually getting back out of that hole. And so now what folks would pay for an average home in Readfield out of pocket this year is the same dollar value they would have paid in 2019. So while a 7.5% increase looks big, I think considering where we are and where we've been, it's actually a fairly reasonable increase, because I would not want to do what apparently has happened with the county and possibly with the school, where tax increases were not adequately reflected. And we're seeing some pretty big jumps in those areas. So I'm going to move on to that.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just to clarify, so we're not saying that your tax bill is going up 7.5%. We're saying the municipal budget tax impact is the 7.5%.
It's the tax, well, so the municipal portion of the tax bill is going up 7%.
Right.
Correct.
Your
Yes.
overall tax bill will have a different raise based on the county and school budgets being approved.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great clarification.
Quick
So I want to
question,
point,
Eric.
oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So this loss of $60,000 state revenue sharing, that's a one-time loss of 60,000?
Well, it's not, and so other towns, Monmouth lost over $100,000.
No,
So-
for us.
Oh, I know,
The
but
60,000
It's
is a
annual.
one-time,
it stays forever.
but
So
it's once this year.
it's, we only get it once, so it's a one-time loss.
For this year. So $60,000 in the whole picture of things. I mean,
It makes a
I hear
difference.
you,
It makes a difference for
but-
taxpayers between a 2% versus a 7.5% tax increase for the municipal side of things. So from a dollar value, it's not huge. From a percent perspective, it's a little bit more impactful.
But it does get calculated again
Every-
anew
yes,
every
yeah.
single year. This is the
okay,
second.
I
part
know,
of
but it's
revenue
not like
sharing.
hundreds of thousands of dollars we just
No,
lost this
But we
year.
might lose money next year too. By the same token,
Yeah,
we might
it back.
get money. It just depends where our valuations
It's not a
are
lot of money
vis-a-vis other
To go up
communities.
to
Yeah.
7.5%.
So it's variable all the time.
It is.
So we used to, for the last 10 years or so, we were able to budget a steady, constant. Sorry.
Okay,
A constant or slightly increasing revenue stream from the state. And now we're going to have to start being much more conservative and actually budgeting lower values, which is, again, impactful for us. But so the school budget, the information on their budget is available on their website. I do want to encourage folks to be involved with both the school and county budgets because they are much larger portions, school particularly. The school accounts for 75% of the property taxes in Readfield, and they're looking at a 10-12% increase this year. Their current draft calls for 11.9%. And so when that's 75% of the tax bill, that makes up a lot of dollars. The county is looking at a 43% increase. And that's not just an error or a pie in the sky. That is a result of a few things. I talked to the county administrator, and they're moving from 5% to 9% of the tax impact for the average taxpayer in Readfield. So they have some budget shortfalls because they used a lot of funds that were ARPA funds as a one-time plug in the budget last year, which left a multi-million-dollar hole. And then they also had some increases, some of which were under their control, some of which weren't. One of them was a $1 million mandate for certain kinds of specialized medical service for incarcerated people, things like that. But all told, they're in a really tough spot, and we're going to feel that as well. So as much as we don't want to include these things and talk about them, it's important to know the backstory and what else is going to be happening with the mill rate, because the municipal part this year is the least of our worries. So this is the picture I was talking about that shows relative property tax impacts. The line at the top is the school and the RSU. They, like us, had a COVID dip. They have accelerated out of that dip much more rapidly than we have, and it seems to be increasing more. The town is the blue line that's in the middle. It's a slightly tighter dash for anybody that needs that. And you look, starting in 2016, we went up a couple years, hit 2019, COVID, we dipped, and then we're coming back up again. So I just think that that's a really important part of the message tonight, is that even though we are having an increase, we have been, I believe, very responsible and gradual in how we've dealt with some pretty major events in the world and in our town. And then the bottom line is the county, and it's a smaller dollar value, but a big uptick. What we're looking at between the RSU and the county, when you add those two dollar figures up, is somewhere over $600,000 in increase. And so that's a big hit for the tax rate. Any questions on this graphic or the overall picture before I start talking about details a little bit more?
Good to go.
Okay, so I guess I did have the municipal tax rate here again. And so this is the average home calculation. I mentioned that. I just want to point out, if you go to the middle column, essentially, that says estimated tax for 2025, which is the top year, $687. That's the average tax impact for a resident of Readfield for municipal services. That's up $48. So an average of about $4 a month more this year than last year. So Carol, you are right in large part. That's not a lot of money, but it may be for some people. But that's just the municipal piece. And again, looking back at the bottom, we're at about $700. One thing to note, in the column to the left of that, the homestead exemption, it was $20,000 in 2019, and then that was increased to $25,000. So that actually shelters a little bit more value. When I did the math, and I said, well, what would it look like if we had the same homestead exemption as we had in 2019? We would be about $1 off. So we really are very much nearly identical in our tax impacts and our overall position, I guess I should say, to where we were in 2019. Again, municipal side only. So fund highlights. Again, this would usually come later in the meeting, but I think it's important to talk about how we're utilizing our reserve balances and our funds to help moderate over the past several years and again this year. Use of fund balances contributes to stability and tax impacts, and it does offset some capital expenditures. Fund balances are conservative, but they are based on audit and reconciliation data. The one thing that's important to note is that I can budget and estimate and have, where I can have reliable numbers through the last fiscal year that we had an audit for. I have to estimate going forward. So we do want to be a little bit conservative looking out, because what we're looking at really in FY24 and FY25 are educated guesses. So I just want to point that out. Use of undesignated funds, designated funds is up an estimated $100,000. That's in large part due to capital project needs and the use of ARPA funds. So we're showing a lot of money going out of designated funds, but one of those funds is ARPA, which was money that we received from the federal government, which we will be applying towards roads and indirectly, I guess, and really we're using it to help offset some of the sidewalk impacts. But use of designated funds, or undesignated funds, excuse me, is up $50,000. So undesignated funds are the funds that are in the reserve that are not tied to any particular project, department, or area of government spending. This is really the checking account, not the vacation fund or not the other fund, right? It's the fund that has the most money in it typically, but we have been using that heavily, and we're going to continue to draw down another 50,000, so a total of 350,000 this year relative to last year. And we do have a policy that says we maintain a minimum 2/12 balance. And the reason we do 2/12 is because it's 12 calendar months and it makes more sense that way. But that's for the annual total budgeted expenditure for operating expenditures, right? So that's not capital. And we expect to be about 3/12 this year. And that's a recommended amount that I feel is appropriate, and I think the auditors like to see a stable balance. Most towns are between 2 and 3/12. So that's where we are with fund balances. And so this is where I graph those two funds. And this doesn't include some special funds like cemetery trust funds. Those aren't included in these numbers. But the red line and the lines that are typically shorter, those are the designated fund balances. So those are things like roads capital, anything for open space, anything for fire trucks or town buildings, all of that stuff. And the taller lines, the blue lines, are our undesignated fund balance. So again, we know with certainty through 2023. But two things I want to point out here is one, that our undesignated fund balances are actually stable and stabilizing. I hope that's a trend that will continue. We do gain benefit from having those funds. We next year will be realizing $75,000 in revenue from interest on investments made with those. And time's up.
Time's up,
I guess I'm
Eric.
done, all right.
Nice presentation.
My watch must be slow.
And the other trend is with the designated fund balances, and those are returning back to levels that are, again, similar to 2019. One reason why we had the bump is that we had a lot of projects. We were borrowing money. We had expenditures for fire trucks, hundreds of thousands of dollars for municipal buildings, and so that really kind of beefed up some of those reserve balances. And then as we've been spending those down on capital projects, the reserve balances have come back down again. I do think that the designated and undesignated funds are in a healthy position, but we will be talking about that more again in May as we move forward with that capital planning discussion. Any questions on the fund balances before I move on? Yeah, Marty. Yeah.
When I'm working at the Maine Municipal Association for quite a long time, I have met and had discussions with a lot of town managers and elected officials. And the 2/12 to 3/12 recommendation for the undesignated fund balance is a general rule of thumb. But what MMA recommends is to look at it in context with a couple of other things. First, some of the, the purpose of the undesignated fund balance, two things. One, to deal with emergencies, things that weren't anticipated, but we do have to spend some money. And two, to be able to moderate tax impacts of the whole budget, including what we receive from the school and county. The other context is the designated funds. By keeping the designated funds, which are funds for special purposes, with strong balances, it takes a little pressure off having to keep funds available that are undesignated. Because those designated funds, like for equipment replacement and things like that, they're there as like the first shock absorbers when something like having to replace a truck or replace important fire equipment. When those things come up, they absorb the first blow, and that means we can be a little bit lower on the undesignated, because predictable kinds of situations are covered first in the designated funds. But that's the point I wanted to make, and I think it's important that both the designated and undesignated stay at healthy levels, so that we don't have to go back to the taxpayers in any year and say, yes, we already sent you the taxes for this year, but we had this horrible thing happen and we need more cash to keep going. I don't think we ever want to be in that situation.
Thanks, Marty.
Okay, so the next item, and this is a point of a bit of a bright spot, I guess, is that our debt service is stable and declining. I think that we have reached the end of some of our major capital expenditures for buildings and equipment for a few years anyway. I think that the fire department is looking at 10 to 15 before we need something else from them. Our buildings, we've done a lot of investment. I think Guile Hall is probably one of the last buildings that needs any kind of substantial work, other than perhaps the transfer station. We've done a good job, I think, of borrowing responsibly and making so that we have scheduling a fairly even debt schedule. We do see a decrease this year, and that's because of the fact that every year for most borrowing, the way we structure it, there's a small decrease in the overall payment. So we retired some debt last year and took on a little bit more this year, but in that we're down a little. So that's the debt horizon. Revenue highlights. Now I'm going to get into a little bit more detail and talk about revenues and expenditures. I didn't do many or any graphics this year really because they don't necessarily make a ton of sense because of the wild swings in account balances due to the account structure changes. But I'll start by saying that we do have a 1.5% tax base increase for new value from growth, and that's improvements in new construction. So that is a good thing, and that's helping to offset some of the other impacts we're seeing. Many revenue lines do appear to be down due to changes in our accounting. The big ones are capital reserves, which are effectively zeroed out, solid waste, which is a sizable reduction, something like 40%. Designated funds are showing as down. Interlocal CEO is being shown as down, and then unclassifieds. And again, that's because some of these things were moved into capital, but I did mention special revenues and interlocal CEO and solid waste are two examples of special revenue accounts or departments. And so we used to show the full expenditure for those areas. However, we also have revenue coming in from other towns in both of those areas. In the capital, in the CEO, we have that split with the town of Wayne, and so our actual impact isn't that full dollar value of providing the position. It's only half that. So that shows both in revenues and expenditures. And the same thing with solid waste. We have revenue coming in from Fayette and Wayne, and we used to show the full expenditure, but that's not really what the Readfield taxpayers are on the hook for. So again, these changes show only what the real tax impacts are. So things look different in those areas. State revenue sharing is down again 14%, and that what was a major loss of funds. When you look at the overall revenue picture, investment income is up due to more investment and relatively high yields. We do expect rate decreases going forward. Right now we're at 5.25%, and I expect that we will be somewhere by the end of next year, maybe 4.5%, maybe 4%, but still reasonable yields. And if we lock things in the first quarter or two of next year, we should be able to maintain close to that 5% yield.
These are on CDs.
CDs, yes, yep. Correct. Yeah. So this is 5% is not great if you're talking the stock market, but let's pretend a great day today. But for safer investments, that's what we're in.
These are fully secured investments.
Fully FDIC secured, and actually we do CDARs, which are aggregate CDs. So the banks take multiple CDs and farm them out, and then aggregate them for us. So, and then motor vehicle revenues are up by $25,000. That is a little bit conservative. I'm still not certain that the economy is looking better every day, but there's some instability in the world that I'm concerned about. And vehicles and vehicle sales are a major revenue source for us, $600,000 to $625,000 this year. So nothing that we want to be too optimistic about. because that could be a big hole for us. And the last thing I want to point out is Department 96, that's transfers. And that's what we used to show as use of special funds or use of designated funds to help offset taxes. But again, this is not the use of those funds for other purposes that don't have a tax impact. This is only money that is being used to offset taxes in that Department 96. Okay, so this is the summary. If you want to get more detail on this, again, I did include in the board packets and for the folks here in person and available online, the summary budget reports, and that gives you a mid-level view. This is a very high-level view. And if you want the real bottom line, we also have available online the detailed line item budget. So administration revenues look like they're up by about 2.5%, and they in fact are. But what that masks is something above about $680,000 increase in taxes. And again, a large part of that is coming from the school and the county. And we had the offset of not having revenues coming in from other areas. The maintenance, no change there. Community services, includes things like the animal control and the library, the PEG station we have here, small decrease there. We have a small increase in recs, parks, and activities. We have in protection a small reduction. That's because we're getting less money from partners, and particularly from the RSU, who no longer uses our tower sites. They switched to satellite. We have roads and drainage revenue up slightly. That's because of fees we get from the state of Maine for that they do share with us and haven't curtailed yet. The capital improvements, huge change here. We no longer are utilizing revenues and expenses out of Department 65. So this is one of those areas that was completely vacated and moved to reserve accounts in the general ledger. Solid waste, this again shows like it's down quite a bit, but it's actually not down that much because we are not counting the revenue we would normally receive from Fayette and Wayne. We have, yeah.
Just, what encompasses protection?
Protection, so that would be the fire department, ambulance services, dispatching, and
Tower sites.
emergency operations.
Okay, but that's revenue. Okay, gotcha.
Yep. Yep. But really revenue in those areas, it only accounts basically the tower sites. So
Thank you. Okay.
yeah. And so in that, it looks like we're down quite a bit in revenues. But again, we're not really. And you'll see a similar decrease in expenditures when I get to those.
And I'm sorry, can you repeat? So capital improvements you were talking about, but it's not on here. You said that disappeared from the budget because
on
it's,
the screen there. Can you, we're up there.
okay, but that moved to where now? In the new accounting?
It's in capital reserves that are not part of, so what we used to do is we used to budget capital expenditures and show the full anticipated expense. And that wasn't necessarily realistic or reflective of what we actually were going to spend or would spend. It included both money raised from taxes and appropriations. So what we've done is switch those things over so that, and it's the kind of, I'm speaking more about expense side, but on the revenue side, it's similar. We're just not showing non-tax impacts anymore because those are being accounted for in the general ledger. And that's, we can talk more about it later too. So expense highlights, or actually before I move on, any other questions about revenue? Shoot, there we go. Okay, expense highlights. Labor and insurance costs are up about $22,000. Again, we do have a 5% negotiated increase that with through the collective bargaining, but we also reflect that for non-bargaining unit employees as a matter of equity. Assessing is up about $5,300. That's to cover map updates and software. We had missed some of that last year in budgeting, and so we have a bit of an extra bump this year. So I will apologize for that. Code enforcement appears to be down, but again, this is due to accounting changes, and it's actually not. It's up about 5 to 7% again, due to wage increases, which is a bulk of that department. Heating assistance was zeroed out and moved to a special revenue account, and legal fees are down about $10,000, due in large part to diminished risk of litigation. Maintenance, the department is up in that about $8,970. Again, labor and materials costs contribute to that. Library is up around $3,500 and change. Labor and expenses also. Recreation parks and activities. Beach expenses are down due to about $6,000, and that's due to miss the space there. We removed the beach superintendent line. And one thing I want to say before I go to the next line is that most of the things we've talked about with revenue and expenses have not been extraordinary. We have not seen major changes in services being provided. We've not seen changes in what we're doing as a town for the most part. But the one change that we have made is this idea of instituting a community programming coordinator, a person to help manage our recreation programming, our age-friendly programming, to help support library programming, and to help relieve some of the burden on town staff administratively. Also, to try to improve the efficiency and productivity of our volunteer boards and committees. So it's a big job. We're starting off with a proposal that is for about a half-time position. And the cost of that is about $27,000. But it's important to note that we have about a $6,000 offset coming from the beach. So even though we do have a new half-time position, it is mitigated somewhat. And I certainly personally feel there's a tremendous amount of value in that position. Protection, again, fire department and ambulance. The fire department is up slightly. We increased wages and stipends for department volunteers. They did not ask for that. We offered that. The budget committee thought it was a good idea. The select board thought it was a good idea. Those folks aren't always subject to the same wage increases as employees. And it's been a few years, so we wanted to respect that. The ambulance service is up an estimated 10%. Right now, we don't know what the actual number will be. I hope it's better than the school or the county. In fact, it's going to have to be at 10%. But we are putting that in. I think we're in a stable point. The last time I talked with Chief Davinsky, he did seem to think that there was going to be an increase, but he couldn't say exactly what. But he said it wouldn't be catastrophic. Dispatch is up an estimated 5%. Again, this is an estimate. Dispatch services are a bit more stable than ambulance. And if any of you have seen what's going on with Delta ambulance services, 10%, I hope is right, but the private ambulance services are feeling a major crunch right now. And I would say that's one of the values of having a municipal run service that we partner on, but don't run ourselves. Cemeteries, excuse me, they are budgeted for a $2,000 decrease. They're still performing a lot of very good work. I think they're just, and Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, but trying to be a bit more responsive to the fact that the budget isn't always expended at the end of the year. Is that about right? Yeah. Okay. Roads and drainage. This is another area where there is a real change. We've increased that by $50,000 for summer roads. The reason for that is we've been spending 50 to 70 every year for the past 2 years to deal with road washouts. And those are reactive measures. Some of them do have long-term protective benefits, but we really need to increase our funding for road maintenance, and that this isn't paving, this is things like ditching and culverts and brush removal, vegetation management. All three of those things, if done properly, will save us money in the long term. And we are working with the road committee to come up with plans. We have one in place now for Plains Road that needs to be implemented this fiscal year or next to harden that road off. We're going to be continuing on this activity like that to make our roads more resilient to the new normal of 2-inch rainstorms in 5 hours, which have been just very, very impactful for us financially. So it is an increase, but I think it's a ounce of prevention, pound of cure. Oh, how does that go? Something like that. And then a small decrease in winter roads. We budgeted last year expecting to see a pretty healthy CPI increase, which is Consumer Price Index. I think we budgeted like 7%, some wild number, and it turned out to be 3 or 4. And so we had an over budget last year, and then this year we're able to drop from last year's budget because our increase this year is only going to be about 2 to 3%, which is really positive, I hope. Capital improvements. There's something going on here with this. Second. The capital improvements line was removed from budget, and again, that was moved to capital reserves. So it's no longer in our operating accounts. It's in capital reserve where it belongs. Tax impacts of funding capital reserves are in Department 96. And so we're showing not the capital projects that we're going to do. We're not showing how much we're going to spend out of reserves. All we're showing with these numbers is how much money we have to take out of taxes to fund those reserve accounts. So that's a really important distinction, but that's that type of approach is universal to what we've done with our accounting changes. But you can get an idea of the things that we're putting money towards. $13,000, 800 for the transfer station reserve. That's our share. Our member towns, Wayne and Fayette, are actually paying now the lion's share of those. I think we're down to like 41% of transfer station costs, and they cover the other 59. Municipal buildings, $40,000. That was lower. And since the last meeting we had with the budget committee and the select board, I did put $15,000 more in that account. I did that because our septic tank here at the town office failed, and that's going to be $20,000. So what we're really doing there is just plugging a hole, and not even all of it. So I wanted to point that out. Roads, $275,000. That's our paving budget and major road work budget. That is flat to last year. Earlier in the budget, I had increased that 300, but again, recognizing the impactful year we were having, I opted for a flat rate. I did discuss that with the road committee, and they're kind of, they'd love to see more, but they understand why. Administrative technology. This is for low power FM radio equipment, which is essentially part of our emergency operations plan. We did receive permission from the FCC to have a low power FM station. This is about half to a third of what we will need to spend for that equipment. And so we're breaking that expense up over a few years. Also plan on utilizing some of our existing reserves for that. Fire department, $25,000. This is to just put money away for truck reserves, equipment reserves, SCBA. And this is another one where we're actually netting about zero, maybe even seeing a dip in the account balance, because the fire department will be replacing SCBA equipment to the tune of $25,000 to $30,000 this year. And so that is a cyclical thing. And this year it's due. We also switched over to higher capacity tanks a few years ago. They can still use the old tanks, but we need to replace them anyway. Let's see, maintenance, 34,177. This includes some municipal leasing numbers, and that's why we have that nice precise number there. There are also some estimates in there as well for reserve savings, but the 177 comes from some portion of a lease agreement. No, wrong direction here.
Eric, I have some questions on those.
Sure, yeah.
So I hear what you're saying about the fire department now. And what's SCBA?
Self-contained breathing apparatus.
Which in
It's what they're-
normal
it's-
words would
they're Scott
be,
packs. It's what they use to breathe when they go into a fire situation.
gotcha. Oxygen, okay.
Yep.
And so I get that, because I was like, what does the fire department need? And that kind of pinpoints that, and then you said the high capacity tank, so I get that. So when we talk about municipal building, $40,000, and oh, we need a new septic, and that's 15,000 or more, what you said. So when are we supposed to be using the undesignated funds? It seems, it seems every year we're putting money towards like municipal buildings, something we might need in the future. And when we look at capital improvements and we look at talking about the warrant questions. And we gotta, this is real stuff.
Mhm.
And this is, we got rid of some miscellaneous things. But when I look at municipal buildings, it's like, we can't point to what are we using $40,000 with, but it's going into the reserves.
Well, we can point to it because we have our capital improvement plan.
Correct, but let me just
Sure.
continue. So when we look at undesignated funds and we look in the last 5 years and it went from, let's say, $1,400,000 to now right below $200,000, 2 million, excuse me, dollars. And we're at the high end of our 3/12. And I remember the accountant saying, we like to see 60 days budget set aside for emergencies. And he said, you guys are over 100 days set aside for emergencies. So it seems we're doing really, really, really well in setting aside money and undesignated funds. And it's, if you look from 2019 to now 2025, we're up to almost 200,000 in undesignated funds. So we keep asking our taxpayers, okay, now we need $40,000 more to go maybe in designated. But now you say we have the septic need. So wouldn't that be a reason, like something we didn't budget, but something that has to be done, where we're taking more out this year versus, okay, we've been setting things aside every single year for municipal buildings. But, oh gosh, we have this septic thing, so we have to increase to 40,000 this year. It just seems like we just keep asking the taxpayers for more and more and more and more to throw into undesignated funds. And then we're taking $300,000 out of undesignated funds to like pay back so the taxes don't look so bad. It all just seems like so, I can't wrap my hand around it. If people, ask, what is this capital improvement of $40,000 at the municipal building? What is, 25,000 at fire department? I get that now. What does a transfer station need? It's just really hard to look at this undesignated fund chart where it's going off the charts compared to 5 years ago. But gosh, we had the septic need and we have to add $15,000 on what we're doing for municipal buildings. It's like we're talking out both sides of our mouth. We're doing really good in undesignated. And we've really planned well for emergencies, but gee, we have this unknown emergency where we need to do our septic. It's like, when do we draw from that? And wouldn't that be like one of those instances where we say, or we have put it aside for year and year and year after year, and now we need to move from that reserve because we need a new septic tank. If the whole thing just, when times are hard, we're trying to keep our seniors in their homes, we're trying to keep taxes down, and we have a $25,000 septic tank. That's not like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like a fire truck, where we have to now, I can't wrap my head around why we have so much money in undesignated, but a little $25,000 septic tank, we have to increase what we're asking taxpayers for this year.
I think you're missing a point here. These are monies that are being taken out of capital reserves. This is not money we're asking additional.
Well, no, this is tax money. these are tax dollars. So I'll just quickly answer and go back to the original chart that we had when we discussed this earlier. Our reserve balances, despite adding money in, are being diminished significantly from where they were. They're back to where they were in 2019. So to say that we're not accounting for that is not accurate. Also, the undesignated fund, we're using $350,000 out of the undesignated fund this year. So that's exactly when and where we use that fund to minimize taxes. We are trying to maintain a stable reserve at 3/12. If the select board or budget committee disagrees with that, you can certainly vote to do something different. It would be risky given the current environment we're in. And we're also increasing our level of spending out of that 350,000 this year instead of 300 last year. So we are pulling more money out of that. We could make it $500,000, but then we could find ourselves in a situation like what the county found themselves in, where they overutilized their reserve balances and they're facing a 43% tax increase. I do not think it's responsible for the town of Readfield to go with a 15% tax increase because we hit an increase last year by using reserve funds. So that's really where we are. We are using these funds. We are using them responsibly. And I just don't know what else to say about those balances. That's really, we're doing the best we can. And it's been a lengthy discussion for months now about those balances.
I mean, we're doing better than we can. I mean, I'm just hearing what the accountant said meeting
They
or two
said 2 to
ago.
3 months, and we're at 3 months.
They said 60 days is the goal and we're over
That's
100
not what they
days.
said.
I believe I took notes on it. I'm just saying, if you look at the chart on undesignated, we have a lot.
Well, part of what we use the undesignated fund for, and Teresa, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here, is we get our money in essentially twice a year from tax buildings. And we have to use that money to pay for things throughout the whole 12 months. And so we get this huge spike of income, and then we have all these expenses coming out, but not everything comes in on schedule. And so we need to have a fund there. So if revenues haven't come in as expected, we still have money to pay our bills. And so it's not that we keep $2 million in the bank all the time. That is constantly fluctuating. Is that right? So it might drop down to $1 million at some point, or 1.2 million, because we've paid bills and then taxes come in again. And so that balance goes back up. And then we're paying bills and paying bills and paying bills, and it drops down again until the next tax payment time comes in. So that's part of what the undesignated fund is used for. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And again, we are realizing $75,000 in revenue because of the investments we're making with that fund while we're holding on to it. We're not asking taxpayers to build that fund up larger. It is declining every year for the past 4 years. So we're not asking them for more. We're asking them to maintain a stable level that allows us to have that security that Catherine was talking about, that allows us to not over spend and mitigate tax impacts. And it allows us to, I mean, we could drop it, we could take $200,000 more out of it, but we would have to reduce our investment income to $25,000. So that actually costs us $50,000. And we also lose the ability to have some of that security that was being talked about. So we really have put a lot of time and effort and thought and discussion into those account balances. And they're not interchangeable, unfortunately.
And
I understand,
Marty,
but I'm
this is part of what you spoke to also, right? That municipal suggests between 2/12 and 3/12.
Well, these 2/12 and 3/12, it's not a number that was scientifically determined. It's a rule of thumb, like, oh, that's about halfway up that wall. That's what a rule of thumb is. My suggestion would be that not as part of this discussion tonight, but that the budget committee and the select board look at the town's balance sheet, its assets and liabilities and fund balances, and develop a philosophy as to how that balancing of assets, liabilities, and fund balance, how that should be managed over what I would recommend, a long period of years, so that you have stability, that we don't get into the situation like whatever described for the county, where you need a 40% increase in what you're charging the municipalities because you used up so much of your fund balance in 1 year. You know, to develop a philosophy, there's no ironclad rules about that. And that every organization, whether it's a municipality or a private company, really has to do that kind of planning. And so I'd recommend that as a topic for the select board to really look at, that philosophy about the appropriate level, whether the undesignated fund balance should be allowed to fluctuate up and down, or whether that line should be kept as level as possible. Those are all policy decisions.
So I get that. I'm just saying, we're doing really exceedingly well on that. If we're at 3/12 and 2 to 3/12 is like a target, and the accountants are like, well, you're doing really good with your set aside, and $75,000 in interest revenue is not a lot of money when we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars extra in there. I'm just saying it doesn't offset investing that much more to get $75,000 in interest. It doesn't offset taking more and more and more from the taxpayers to keep that. So I understand we don't want to fluctuate wide swings, get that. I'm just saying we're doing really, really well, and to keep saying we need to vote in that many more tens of thousands of dollars in capital improvements for tiny little expenditures is just, we keep asking the taxpayers to just do more and more and more every year. And it's the last 3 years have been awful on people's budgets, and that's when it skyrocketed during COVID.
Okay, I think you've made your point, and
Okay.
I think the graph clearly shows that the municipal side has not been what's been impacting the taxpayers. It's the county side and primarily the school side. And we can't control those votes. So if people are willing to vote in $1 million increase for the school on a $15 million budget, that's their choice. And then that raises our overall tax bill. But that's nothing anyone in this room can control other than as an individual voting. The lion's share of this, you know, as Eric pointed out, on an average house is going to go up $4 a month. So about $50 over the course of the year for the municipal part. And so, yes, that is real money. We're not discounting that. But I thank you for your point. You've made it. And Eric, would you move on, please?
Sure. So moving on to solid waste, we do show a decrease due to, again, the accounting changes, but it is up about 7% due to labor and contract costs. We do have a heavy labor presence at the transfer station, but we also do a lot of hauling and tipping for the material disposal and transport, and those contracts are going up as well. So that's actually pushing us a little higher than we would normally see. Education tax, so this is not the municipal side, again, 11.9% increase, that's $480,000 increase for the town of Readfield alone. When you look at the other municipalities, it's millions. The county tax, again, this is not something we have any control over, 43%, so $153,000 increase there. These numbers may change, but I'm not terribly optimistic. Debt service, we do have that small decrease that I talked about earlier due to lower payments. Unclassified, most lines were moved to a special revenue account, and operating expenses were zeroed out for that. So this is the expense by department. I'm not going to go through all of these. It is worth noting that the rec parks and activities is up a net of $22,000. The staff position that we talked about is a major contributor to that. We see small increase for protection, again, wages. Roads and drainage, the net there is 48,000 because we did have that small decrease in winter roads, but the $50,000 increase in summer roads. Capital improvements and solid waste both were affected by the accounting changes. Education, we went over that. County, we went over that. Debt service also, and then unclassified, another one that was affected by the accounting changes because those were moved to special revenue accounts. And that wraps up the, I guess, essence of the budget discussion. In a little bit, we'll be going on to the warrant highlights, but I'll stop screen sharing for now for a minute in case there's questions that Catherine wants to manage from the public up here and online.
So my first question, Steve, how are we doing on time?
We are a little less than an hour in to the 1.5 hours allotted to this.
Excellent.
Can I,
So,
Great.
can I ask Eric a quick question,
Yes,
please?
we can start with the people at the table and then we'll go to the public.
Okay. Do you have any sense of when the school board might close its budget?
I think early April. The select board actually has a joint meeting with them on the 27th
Yeah.
of this month, and that's a chance for feedback. I've never really seen much of a change as a result of that. I'm not trying to be hard, but I just don't think that there's much that can happen there. But they typically do finalize their budget in early April.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else from the budget committee have a question, comment at this time? Anyone else from the select board? Okay, any comments from the public in the room? Yes, please go to the podium and introduce yourself.
My name is Christopher Goyer. I live in the Fog Road. I just want to endorse, number one, the position that you're adding to help out with recreational and other services in town. I think that coordination will pay off in the long run. It's a good investment, and I commend you for doing it. I want to thank everybody for what they're doing tonight, because I think it's very educational for us and the public. And maybe one of the reasons you don't have a large crowd here is we've been kind of doing this education about what the municipal part of the budget is for a number of years. And I think people a little bit more thoroughly understand that. At least when I'm talking on the street to people, they seem to do that. I would urge you to consider inviting your delegation from the state House and Senate, as well as our county representative, to come to one of these hearings. And I would go as so far as to invite somebody from the governor's office to attend too. Not to beat on anybody or to do anything more than to enlarge the education to a wider audience. Because when things like revenue sharing go down, and that's all just not simply a function of a bunch of numbers moving around and blah, 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 there you go. It's a function of policy. And so if we have state representatives who kind of hear our angst at that kind of thing, at least when they're in the room and that sausage is being made, perhaps their thinking will be slightly different. We have had state reps attend before. Our state representative in the House actually lives in town. Our county representative, the county is broken up into 3 districts, is from Winthrop. And I would invite these people to at least drop by to one of the hearings and maybe specifically focus inviting them to one of the 2 May hearings or a separate meeting entirely. But I think it'd be a good idea just as a courtesy too. They make policy and they ought to know a little bit more about how policy impacts the hard work that you guys do around the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Anyone else in the room? Is there anyone online who would like to speak? Have a comment? There are none. So we will now move on to the warrant highlights. The next things will be the community park, the sidewalk, and LUO and other ordinance revisions, each taken on their own section. while Eric's getting there, I'll just let everyone know that there has been a draft warrant put together. We reviewed it at our last meeting a week or so ago. Had the budget committee has seen that also? Has not seen it?
Yeah, no, not yet.
Not yet, okay. And we'll be looking at that again on the 1st of April, and the budget committee, I assume you're meeting sometime in the next week or two. And we'll see that, and then that will be out for 2 different public hearings in May. One before the absentee ballots and one in the required period about 10 days before the election.
Okay, so the first item would be and these are going to be just quick summaries of some of the more substantial items on the warrant. And hopefully this is a 5 to 10 minute discussion, although we do have Rick here from mainland to talk if anybody has any questions about the fairgrounds project. We have the plan for that up here when we get to it. But the Church Road sidewalk is a multi-year federally funded project, bicycle and pedestrian focused, with safety being the primary consideration. And it does connect high use areas in Readfield. This project is 80% federally funded and 20% locally funded. Approximately 1.2 million for the total project cost. Use of reserves will cover our portion, so there will be no additional tax impacts this fiscal year. We did put money away in reserve in past years so that we would not have to raise as much.
Eric, I think you
Skip.
skipped
Oh.
the slide.
Oh, did I?
Just
Yeah,
Just
Jeez.
we're on
slide
the,
it.
we're
You
on
go
the
back to
park.
it,
Okay, well, I'm almost done.
Okay.
So,
That was the sidewalk, so let's go back to the park.
okay, all right. So the Fairgrounds Community Park, it's 2 warrant articles that are currently proposed. We do have, first one would be the approval of Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. This is a major funding component. 50% of the project costs can and hopefully will be covered by that grant, but the grant does require that the voters approve the application process. The next article would be the approval of the concept project plans. So it's very important to note that what we are looking at in our packets, or maybe not in the packets, but in the information that's been presented to date, this is a concept plan. This is not a final plan. If it shows gardens being in one location or a mature tree being in another, that's not necessarily exactly where they're going to be. These are just concept plans, 50%. And so there can and will be changes to how all those things come together when things get put together in final form. No financial warrants are proposed for that due to the tax impact. There is none for the construction of the project. We will have some modest ongoing maintenance costs, but those won't even start accruing until FY26 more than likely. Project includes a few key components: the expanded multi-use field, the base basketball and sports court, and amenities like water, electric, improved rest areas, and some gardens, along with some trail and other work. And again, this is very high level. We do have a lot of information available on the town website, and we've had a number of meetings on this, hearings, discussions, and there's a lot of information out there for folks who want it. The project cost is going to be just under $1 million, and that will be funded through grants and donations. Donations would include cash contributions from community members and grants, and also in-kind labor and materials donations that might come through. So that's a quick summary on that. I guess I'll ask Rick if he wants to come up in case anybody wants to pepper him with questions.
He is here.
Nice to have you, Rick.
Thanks for having me.
Have there been any changes to the plan since we had our last public meeting?
I'm gonna ask Eric to speak to that because I don't know what the plan looked like as of your previous meeting.
Yeah, so the short answer is no. What we've done is I've done a better job of estimating costs. We reached out to some contractors to confirm the numbers. We did some work to break them out by the actual project areas. So utilities are one area, the basketball court's another area, the field's another area. So we confirmed those numbers, have a high level of confidence in them at this point. And Rick was very instrumental in helping make that happen for us, so we could get a real good budget number to bring forward to both the discussion around the town meeting vote, but also in fundraising. So, yeah.
Carol?
I have a question. So I just have a question. The softball field portion, was there an estimate for just that portion? I was just looking for that. I thought I saw the figure recently and I was just trying to find it.
Yeah, approximately 630,000 is the ball field improvements.
That's the number I thought I saw. So last year we voted on the project, including the same softball field, and the whole project was 475, I don't know, whatever that figure was. It was under $500,000. So now we're doing the same thing. We added a basketball court and the same softball field blossomed to 630,000. How does that happen? This is a small town softball field. So I cannot fathom $630,000 for Little League, not high school, not college softball field. So how did that completely explode like that?
Yeah, so the first thing I hit on is just simply inflation of, as you know, all the numbers that you've been reviewing tonight, all of them tend to go up with materials and labor and all of those costs that are following inflation. But more substantially, I think the change that was made from the less expensive plan to this current is that the field was raised to be made on the same level. And that makes better utilization of space. So the fields are back to back now, outfield to outfield, and that provides more contiguous grass space for other activities other than just two separate softball fields. I think that's the major difference. Now you see an increase in cost through a little bit more bulk earthwork moving around, more material to move, but your benefit for what you're purchasing as a town there is, instead of just getting a softball field, you now have a combined recreation field that can be used for partitioned out into youth soccer or field hockey, or even just grass space for fairs and what have you. So you end up with more usable contiguous grass space that I think is important.
So a lot of land backfill. Wasn't there a lot of drainage for like some wet areas or something in that area that was also maybe gone into the difference? But it's more level playing field, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's
Than
the big change. We had drainage in there before, and there've been some minor tweaks as we've ironed out, small programmatic changes, but I think the big thing is bringing the fields onto the same elevation.
Okay. Thanks.
I just want to say, I think your numbers are wrong too, because when it was 2 years ago, when we looked to bond it, is what you're recalling. And the final number at the time was closer to $750,000 for the project. When we went to bond and the public vote, which was voted down.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions about the field project for Rick? Thank you for sitting here through all this. I don't know what town you come from, but you learned a little bit more about Readfield tonight.
Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me and having me here. I learned a lot through this process and seeing how our towns interact. I live in Wayne, and so I'll make a small, I'd say shameless, but I guess there's a little shame in it, plug for the sports fields, because I'm a member of this region, and our my kids play there, and I think it's an important thing to attract folks to the area. A central community spot increases its a community's sense of community, and that is really attractive to professionals that you want moving into Readfield, I think, and essential for sharing of folks. I don't want to make this an age thing, but folks with wisdom interacting with some of our maybe our younger folks. So having a community area where these events can be held especially dovetailing with the new position that you guys are creating for the events coordinator, I think is really special for the town and the, you know, the community as a whole, including Wayne and some of the surrounding towns. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah. 5 minutes of glory for an hour and a half. Wait.
And you don't have to stay for the rest of this. You won't be offended.
Oh.
Eric, now you can go on to your sidewalk pitch.
All
We're
right.
doing great.
Do I have to start over or can I start?
No,
over?
No,
definitely
you
not.
continue on.
Timekeeper says no.
You don't have enough time to start.
All
Go,
right.
Chris.
Fair enough. Thanks, Chris. I'll go back. So we were right in the middle of the 80-20 funding match. So the use of reserves will cover our local share. We will receive $960,000 in federal grant funds. And this does require an article on the town meeting warrant that uses ARPA funds for road work, but also transfers road reserves to sidewalk reserves. So we're essentially, backfilling. We can't use ARPA funds directly for this type of project, but we can use them for a different focus area. Paving's a really great use of those, and then have those funds freed up to offset the sidewalk project. The sidewalk includes features and safety being the primary one, traffic calming, on-street parking, light improvements, and drainage improvements. So I think you're all aware of where we are with that. We've had 3 public hearings and are also in the phase of having a concept plan that still does need more work to iron out all the details. But there's no point at this point spending more money on design or engineering until we know whether the voters are willing to move forward with that.
So Eric, before you start on the next one,
I
I'd
will
say you're doing
stop.
pretty well. You got 19 minutes and you've only got 2.5 little boxes left to go. So
We don't have to use it all.
just don't slack off. Oh, I know. I'm just telling you, don't slack off thinking you got it made.
So I do have a question. Does anyone else have a question before I ask one? Okay, I have to remember I have to go last. Will there be more detailed talk about these when we have our next 2 meetings on the 8th and the 29th, is it?
You mean the first?
No, in May, when
Oh,
we
May.
have the
Oh,
warrant
May, that's right.
meetings for the public. Will there be more discussion or information available for people?
I expect it'll be a similar amount. I mean, everything that we have is available. I wasn't, because we've already had 3 public hearings for this and a whole lot of work for the fairgrounds. We certainly could add another hour to the meetings, but I don't know if that's the value we want. I think that we should be focusing, when we do these discussions, on educating people that these things are happening, letting them know where they can find the information if they haven't been engaged already, but also just focusing primarily on the budget impacts, which are in both of these cases minimal to none. So
Okay, so, but we will highlight them in the mailer that we send out. It's the explanation of all the budget lines.
Yes,
And the
so
warrant article lines.
those absolutely will have highlights. We will have this concept plans for both of those projects in that mailer, like we did 2 years ago, or whatever the last time was we did the fairgrounds project.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm trying to be soft with the mouse so I don't skip another one. So the next set of items is really more administrative. And the big one that was a hearing last night actually about is proposed land use ordinance changes. And these are exclusively changes at this point, and I think that's going to stay that way, for compliance with LD 2003, which is a state mandate on housing density, affordability, and location. So a lot to do with auxiliary units, a lot to do with multiple units. I don't know all the details on this, but I do know that we're essentially dealing with something that we are required to do. The planning board has gone through the process. I talked with Paul today. She confirmed that the planning board did approve the language changes that were proposed and developed and reviewed by the planning board in consultation with North Star Planning. And they're going to be moving those on to the select board. You will see those at your next meeting as part of the warrant process. If anybody has anything else to add to that, that's all I have.
I just, me and Dave and Marty were at the meeting last night. I just have to say, I was at the original meeting when they were talking about having to respond to this short deadline and something very complex from the state. And they hired a consultant using a grant, which is excellent, who has been doing the same kind of set of responses to the legislation for a lot of municipalities. And he rolled it out, and the planning board did a phenomenal job of picking and choosing and making it ours, and didn't go beyond what is required. They did a fabulous job. Paula did a lot of work on it. And we meet it. We don't exceed it. And I thought they did a great job. I know it came up, we had something with a tie-in with Winthrop and Manchester, and Chip happened to say yesterday that Manchester is way behind the ball, and they're just realizing this is required like soon, and are really chasing it and very behind. But the planning board did a phenomenal job.
I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah.
Okay, we can move on to the LUO revisions.
Okay,
Thank
so.
you, Cheryl.
So the other ordinance revisions that I'll just touch on, these are revisions and one new ordinance, kind of. So the marijuana establishments ordinance is being revised. The only change there is to limit the number of caregiver retail stores to 2, which is what we currently have in town. We do not currently allow adult use, recreational use, sales. And so.
Sorry, do we still have 2?
We have
We just
one.
have one.
We have one, but we have another application in process. Excuse me. Yeah, we had 2. Yeah.
So we're not changing the current status, but we have no limit currently. So this is introducing a limit to what we recently had and currently have, which is one has closed and one is still open.
Correct, yeah, and I mean, it could be a free market thing if we just left it alone, but there was a lot of concern from residents in the comprehensive plan feedback we got, that they didn't want to see 6. They didn't want to be like Manchester and the Green Mile, so I think it's a wise choice for us to just say, we're happy.
If you can get through there, do you even need us?
Well, it's
Moving
combustible,
on.
so you could be gone by the time you get here. But the administrative ordinance, we do have some changes there. Most of those are related to the last ordinance, which is on this list, which is the disposition of tax acquired property. But there are also some other cleanup items. That ordinance basically gives the select board some of their authorities outside of what's granted at town meeting and through the town meeting warrant. And so a few small changes there. Waste disposal and recycling ordinance. This was a pretty significant redraft. We've had a lot of changes since this was last done in 2011. Our recycling looks nothing like what it did back then. We're almost exclusively cardboard, and now we're accepting batteries, clothing, paint, and a number of other peripheral things that we have partnered with producer organizations to put in place. So the whole system has changed, our whole setup has changed, the flow of traffic has changed. So we really needed to update that. Also, we had a lot of definitions that were stuck, and they've been updated by like adding in a CC-1 or CC-2. It wasn't really practical, so what we did is we updated some of the definitions to be more contemporary, and then moved them into an exhibit that can be amended by the select board. So now we can adjust to waste streams and what things mean as far as what's recyclable and what's not, or what's acceptable at the transfer station as far as waste goes and what's not, in real time, as opposed to having to go to town meeting. So responsible change there, I believe. Property tax assistance program ordinance. This one needed a few things to clarify the application process, but mostly I'm excited about the fact that the select board voted to increase the availability of those funds. It went from, I think, 300 to maybe 500. It was a change in that range, so that folks can have more assistance with their taxes. This program piggybacks on the property tax fairness credit program by the state of Maine. But it is separate from the tax freeze that was recently repealed, which is really going to hurt residents in our town. I think it's unfortunate that it was put in place in the first place the way it was. The town had to implement it, and then it's going to be repealed, and people are going to be very, very unhappy. We're going to have to do a lot of work in our tax bill mailings, in other mailings to help people find these resources. Because with what's coming down from the school and county, and you know, admittedly a little bit from us, they're going to need some help. And a lot of our seniors are missing a whole year of increases that happened last year, about a 5% increase last year. So they're on the hook now for a sizable increase. It could be upwards of 20% from what they saw 2 years ago. So we need to do our best to help with that. This will allow us to do that to some extent. We also have a disposition of tax acquired property ordinance. This is a new ordinance, but we had a policy that did something similar. State law changed. We had to respond to that. Also, the Supreme Court ruled on the taking of property by municipal entities. So a few things happened. This ordinance allows us to meet the new state statute and I think maintain some of the I don't know, but not sincerity, but the connection that we have, because we don't want to take people's property. We want to give them every chance to keep it, but we also know that we have an obligation, because if people don't pay their taxes, then that means the rest of us have to. And so there's a balance there. This ordinance does a few things to address that need, to maintain our small community approach, but also meet state statute. And that is everything that is worth noting. And I'll turn it back over to Catherine for closing communications.
I'll just go, you don't have to move the slide back, but one of the goals of the select board was to clean up a lot of these ordinances and policies that we have a long list of each. Some things haven't been reviewed in 15+ years in a meaningful way that's been notated. And so that's one of the things we've been working on, which is why you're seeing 5 different things come up before you now. And we'll expect to see that over the next several years as we tidy things up and make things current. Just makes it better for everybody moving forward. Is there any closing comment from anybody from the budget committee? Anyone from the select board? Eric or Teresa?
One quick statement. I want to thank Teresa for all her work in the budget process. I couldn't do it without her. So it's very much appreciated. And I do want to remind folks that this is the kind of the last hurrah. Moving forward, we'll be talking about the budget as it is, not as it could be or will be. So if there are any additional public comment that needs to come forward, please do get that in. Again, it's been a weird budget process, and I appreciate everybody being patient and working with us to understand the accounting changes and kind of where we are in a situation where we have prices increasing, but are doing our best to manage those. So, thank you.
So I'd just like to clarify that once we get to the April 1st meeting of the select board and the next meeting of the budget committee, the numbers are going to start being voted on as being the numbers that are presented to the public. And those numbers won't be able to be changed. So the next 2 hearings, which are my closing statements, May 8th and May 29th, are to inform the public of what the numbers are. So they won't be able to be changed at that point. The change that you can implement is by how you vote. So if you don't think something is acceptable, then you vote it down. And if it doesn't matter to you or you like it, then you vote yes. Just a reminder that at the beginning of the meeting, I said that we're going to plan on using the 2nd meeting of the select board in May, which is Monday, May 20th. So that's like 8 weeks away from now. So that's a while. At 6:30 for an hour to go over the CIP and the accounts that have been set up with their definitions. And then we'll have a regular select board meeting agenda from 7:30 to 8:30, possibly till 9. But we'll try to make it till 8:30. So important dates coming up, the homestead exemption applications close on April 1st. April 12th, sorry, is when nomination papers and the warrant are due to the town clerk. So our job has to be all done by April 12th in terms of final votes on the warrant. May 10th is absentee ballots will be available, and we'll be holding a public hearing on the 8th prior to that for anyone who has questions. Also, the newspaper fold-out thing similar to the RSU that we published as the explanation for the warrant will be available prior to the 10th when the ballots come out. And then the hearings are 8th and the 29th of May, and June 11th is town meeting, which is by secret ballot. So that means you've got to show up or send in your absentee ballot. And with that, we'll close the meeting 22 minutes early at 8:08. Thank you, everybody.